Okay, peace. We're going to be dealing with the movie Day Shift. Bud would basically represent the deity Hercules, the hero, the deity Hercules, or the god Rama, the god Rama in India. Now, Bud's wife will represent the goddess in India, basically Sita, which is Rama's consort. But in all the other mythologies, like the Hebrew, would be Sophia. The Greek, it would be like Persephone, Ariadne, many of these Shaktis there, these nymphs and damsels there. And they always stereotypically get saved by the hero. And we'll go into the symbology when I'm done this tape for what all of this really translates to, what all of this really means. But now I'm going through each character. That will be the mother and daughter. Big John symbolizes is the god Apollo in the Greek mysteries, the Greek mythology, and the god Krishna in India. Now the character who pretty much is the one assigned by the Union to follow Bud and basically document everything he does, that will be the deity Hermes. And it's key that we identify him as Hermes because he is the one who leads the way with the information and the knowledge and the intellect. He represents the intellect to get you from one world to the next. And he's recording everything you do, you see, and judging your soul. That without a doubt is Tahuti or Hermes, many of these intellectual deities who help the hero move from one realm to the next or conquer demons or navigate through the spiritual world. The two brothers represent Castor and Pollux of the Greek mythology. Now in the Hindu they're called the Ajwan twins, okay, the Ajwan twins. And these two brothers are key with slaying demons in Hindu mythology and in Greek mythology. Now the vampires basically represent the demon. In Greek they would call them chthonic spirits, sometimes they call them primordial chaos beings, chaos spirits. But in the Hindu they're called asuras, okay? The vampire aspect of demons or asuras would be called the term rakshas. Remember that word rakshas. All of this we can look up and give you references for all of this. Rakshas. And you have other type of vampiric like entities in that mythology. And that's why when you watch this movie you have about 5 to 6 different distinct type of vampires. Well, that's coming straight out of mythology. Because in mythology you have these different types of demons or vampiric like dark entities who pretty much possess and who feed on different villages and populations of people. And we translate that into modern day through horror films, through legends, through myths, through fairy tales, etc., as vampires and so lore. You get into the origins of it, it takes you back to ancient spiritual teachings and esoteric knowledge that was contained within it, because there's different metaphysical principles that these vampires and the vampire slayers embody. So that's what we're trying to unpack right here through the movie Day Shift. So vampires represent basically the demonic category of demons in the Hindu mythology called rakshas. It's called asuras, it's the big umbrella, but rakshas. And that means blood eaters, blood drinkers. Okay? So the Union will represent the gods. Now in the Greek mysteries they're called the Olympians. Amongst the Hindus they're called the Devas, okay? In the Bible and in the Christian world they're called the Archons or the Baalim. Sometimes you see them translated as the Elohim, or the Bnei Elohim, the sons of Elohim, the sons of God, or the gods. So those would be certain level of demigods that dwell pretty much in the third level of heaven. They're very powerful, but their major dilemma is they have to fight in their adversaries against the demons versus the gods. That's usually how the mythology plays out. It's the war in heaven, and that's pretty much what this movie is all about. The war in heaven. We'll deal with how that is metaphysically, because the war of heaven it represents as within, so without. That mythology you see on the screen externally, the fiction, is really supposed to be symbolic of your inner psychology, your inner war. And obviously the vampires would be like the 7 negative principal evil levels of consciousness. They call it cardinal sins, or the 7 princes of hell. And the 7 positive generally would be the angelic levels of consciousness, but also it would be like the gods, basically the gods. So the Union represents the gods, basically the more positive, benevolent entities. But they're not perfect. See, that's the one thing about the gods and all the mythologies. They're not perfect, but they're at least not as corrupt or as malevolent or as evil as the demons, you see. The major villain or the antagonist, the major female vampire, she basically represents a Asuri, we call it Asura in the Hindu mythology, called Sapernica. You gotta look at Sapernica, but Sapernica was a big enemy against Rama in the Hindu mythology. In the Hebrew mythology, this same female vampiric entity or deity would be called Naima, and she's basically the youthful, seductress-like demoness in the Hebrew and Babylonian and Sumerian mythologies. So you look up Naima. Now, the elderly old vampire, the first vampire they showed in the movie when he goes into the house from cleaning the pool, that would be what they call in mythology the old hag, right? The old hag. And she also is considered like the concept of a banshee, right? A very disturbed, elderly female, fierce deity, fierce female deity. And in all spiritual systems across the world, they have them. Now, in the Hebrew and Babylonian, Sumerian, Canaanite, that would be Lilith. But amongst the Hindu system, that would be the Dakinis. Dakinis are known as these old hags who curse people and screech and yell and disturb them and so on. And they're vampires, they're succubus and so on. That would be the old aged female vampire at the very beginning of the movie. If you pay attention in the movie, they say that these vampires were worshipped as gods. And that's key, that's very interesting that they highlighted that. So that should show you that the movie is in layers. It's deeper than just for entertainment and just for the sake of comedy and a little horror. No, they're trying to drop jewels in there. And if I had time, I'd unpack the whole movie thoroughly, like the details and what jewels are actually there, what they're trying to hint at. But just overall, I'm trying to just do a quick breakdown. And what's interesting is they mentioned that these vampires were once worshipped as deities, right? Well, that worship in the ancient or archaic world is considered the left-hand path, right? The invocation and the devotion to these chthonic or negative entities, okay? These demonic or negative entities. And there's many reasons why they would get into the worship of them, but yes, and a lot of different key historical devotees of these left-hand deities are known to get possessed by these deities, and that's where the whole embodiment of the vampire legend comes from, that they are embodied by a particular force or particular entity. And the thing about these demons, I have to break this down thoroughly so you understand why demons, why we even mention demons. Well, because one thing that demons subsist on is two things. That's blood. They always preside primarily over blood rites, the spilling of blood, the eating of blood. Very key in a lot of different ceremonies, rituals, all universally across the world. That would be the left-hand practices. And also they're known to survive and eat on human and animals' fear. That is what is the goal of these entities. So they can possess other humans to put fear in you, whatever it may be, but they use and they eat fear, the hormone, cortisol, adrenaline, all of these different hormones, especially a key hormone, adrenochrome, as an intoxicant or as a food for them. So that is what the key intention behind what these entities or unseen forces in nature and that are inside of our body, that's what they are driven by. A thirst or a hunger for you, your fear or your hormones. So that's where vampires come in, because they put fear in you, horror in you, have you run, play around with you, tour around with you, hunt you down, and then they eat from the nectar of your blood, which will be the adrenochrome. You see where I'm going? So left-hand practitioners are known to sacrifice and eat actual human beings. See, this is where legend becomes history in reality. And it's well documented, it's well known, it's well published. It's PhD literature from universities that know this is a fact. So you can go to medieval Europe, Renaissance period Europe, Victorian Europe. You can go to the Gothic era. I mean, you can go all throughout history. The Byzantine era, all the way to that really ancient Egypt, ancient Nile Valley, to East Africa, the Nile River. I mean, Africans, we know about cannibalism. We heard about ritualistic cannibalism. Yeah. So these left-hand rites are very ancient, and it's presiding under a world of these left-hand entities. Okay, and that's what our war really is against from day to day. And our war is not just against these left-hand chthonic or evil, wicked forces or entities. It's also semi against the gods of this world too, the demigods, because they can distract you and keep you here. But one eats on your joy and your happiness, and the other eats on your fear and your pain and your sorrow. But they both well invested on you being trapped in this material world and eating from you. So what you have to do is realize the supreme being, the soul that is within you, that's not subordinate to these deities. Remember, these two deities, right and left, are subordinate to the supreme deity. It's primordial, it's before the creation of the total material world. That is our own true self. So the goal of the awakener is to slay the demons, to humble the gods, which in this movie is what Bud does. He humbles the gods. Him and Big John, they humble the gods, and they reach a level of liberty or liberation from these entities. Entities that invoke fear in you, suck your blood, invested in getting your semen or your sexual fluids, and they are different hormones that put you in different psychological states to cause you to do different acts. The 7 cardinal sins, or you have negative thoughts. That's what translates basically to negative consciousness, negative thoughts. Those demons are universal. So that is vampire mythology. The halo basically represents the Enlightenment. That is the day shift. Okay, that's the brim hat, that's the cowboy hat. And day shift basically represents the time of day, or the time of one's life or one's experience when you slay the demons. And that is symbolic of Bud reaching a level of enlightenment, and Big John giving that level of enlightenment to Hermes through their journey, through their travel. Gives them the brim hat. That represents the opening of the 7th and highest chakra. Obviously, the secretion of your highest hormones in your pituitary gland, okay, or your pituitary and penile gland. Reaching that level of enlightenment or conscious experience frees you or liberates you from the demons eating from the hormones of your fear, your sorrow, right? And the hormone that we spoke of earlier as well, the adrenochrome, okay? You don't secrete that, you secrete the hormones of intoxication, bliss, by overcoming the vampires. Go through stages of these movies as he's slaying each one of these demons, or like Rama in Hindu mythology slays these different demons. You're literally slaying different negative principles in these 7 components of your organs, which the Hindus call chakras. Now in America and in the English language, in science we call them endocrine glands, or the endocrine system. And these glands are key to your body's biology and your level of consciousness, your everyday conscious experience. So in India they call them chakras. So at each level of this movie, as each type of demon he slays, at each space of demons he slays, they represent conquering different levels of the chakras. Okay, so the solar principle that I went into with the halo, you have to understand that is why it's key with the concept of day shift, because the day in ancient mythology and in ancient spiritual practice, the day represents the time of the devas. The night represents the time of the asuras. The twilight, sunset represents the time of the ancestors, called the Petri. Those are ancestral spirits, or tutelary ancestral spirits of the Greek and Roman mythology. They represent twilight, when the sun's going down. So the daylight is the day of the gods, the night is the day of the demons or the asuras. The morning is the time of the supreme deity, about 4 o'clock to about 5:30. That's the time of the supreme being. That's beyond gender, beyond duality, beyond all of these subordinate deities. But every other category of the day has its allotment for energy of a particular type of deity. And that is called in the Sanskrit Muhurta. Now you have Brahma Muhurta, which represents the time I spoke about, 4 o'clock, 6. But there's many Muhurtas, and you can go and I'll show you a chart. It goes through these different types of qualities of deities throughout parts of the day. In this movie, day shift represents the time that the demons, the Asuras, should be the vampires and defeated, and it's the time with the gods, right? The day shift. I'm going to break this down and summarize the whole movie and explain what the whole movie is about metaphysically and esoterically. Now that I broke down the characters and a little bit of the spiritual components in the movie and a little bit of the history of vampires and cowboys, I believe, etc. But now we're just going to deal with what does the metaphysics mean based on your spiritual and esoteric practice. What does it actually identify? Remember, as within, so without. As above, so below. So we're going to break down what that would mean for your day-to-day experience. So bud would represent the soul, like I said. That root term bud comes from Buddha, or the Bodhisattvas. And we translate that into the Greek and Latin languages, that would be like your heroes. Same concept. They represent a state of reaching enlightenment. The Buddhas. Okay? So bud is your soul. It's your soul. Okay, now the vampires will represent the negative thoughts. Like I said, demons, but that would be a negative thought. So your soul has to fight against what these negative thoughts from day to day. Right? The union represents your positive thoughts, right? Your benevolent thoughts, your positive, your good thoughts. The wife represents the spirit, right? I told you, spoke of that before. She embodies that particular goddess, but she represents the spirit and translates into your body, into your consciousness. She will be your spirit. The daughter will represent wisdom. The helper that he had as a guide in the recorder would be what? Your intellect. Your intellect. The halo, which was Big John, will represent your enlightenment. You reaching enlightenment, union with your higher self. And so through the movie, as the soul is moving through the movie, the soul is moving through the underworld, which would be initially during the day, but they have him start fighting at night underground. Well, that would be the soul moving through the duat of the underworld, which would be your subconscious, and conquering these negative thoughts, these vampires that want to eat your fear and eat your sorrow, eat your negative experience as food. And he slayed these vampires until he finally reached the principle two male and female demons or vampires. And he slayed them. The union, the group, will be your positive thoughts, but basically good. Now, a lot of times they can get in the way of the soul because they might not be invested on doing nothing much more than making money, pretty much, looking for status and money. So the gods that run this world, they can be a problem as well. So you have to get around them and get through their bureaucracy and their principles and politics, which is a spiritual experience. Literally, you have to get through them and be able to conquer these negative principles. Wife, basically the spirit can leave you. She can go against you, turn her face against you, want to leave and go to a whole other side of the cosmos and abandon you. But what he was able to do by slaying these negative spirits is retain his spirit back, the Holy Spirit back, and keep it. Now the daughter would be wisdom. Now the thing about that is, you see his relationship with his daughter, just translate that to wisdom. Every single thing that happens. How he is sometimes a negligent father, trying his hardest. He has to get money for her to go to school, or for her to learn. Well, that's wisdom. You get all that's dealing with knowledge and wisdom. That goddess is coaching. So the daughter represents wisdom. And the one who takes notes, like I said, that would be intellect. That would be your intellect or your memory, right? Helping you make judgment and balancing out and weighing out your heart to distinguish whether or not you're pure and you deserve to keep slaying these negative entities, so you can get your spirit or your Holy Spirit back and get back in union with her and get your wisdom back to be able to get your enlightenment. That is the metaphysical and esoteric breakdown of the movie Day Shift.
Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram, Jai